So I'm Kathy Baldwin-Heitman, and I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague Dane Z. So Dane, tell us about how you see yourself, what your professional self and your role in advancing global citizenship.
As a professional capacity, I see the work that I do as a community builder, as an educator, and as an individual, based on finding the way that systems work in the natural world and applying those systematically at a personal, social, and hopefully community-driven level.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it is important to understand the difference between being nationally attentive and being globally attentive. I think one of the main focuses professionally that I have is to illustrate the difference and to understand that many of the things that we take for granted only are affected in the third world. And when you look at them globally, they have a much different impact and weight than they do in the first world and in places like where we live.
So let me back up and ask you, so when did this idea of global citizenship first come into your vocabulary or even enter your thinking?
I was 17. By chance, I was taken under the Christian Brothers to do mission work in Guatemala for 6 months. I stayed in San Lucas Taliman, which is a missionary town. It is a lake town surrounded by mountains. Surrounding on the outskirts of those mountains are coffee plantations. And then right next to that is a non-for-profit, supposedly, institution driven towards helping impoverished or third world country status people. What I found in my work there was that the non-for-profit was actually for-profit, as well as profiteering off of the basic slave labor of the indigenous people there. In talking with some of the colleagues that I had or mentors that I had at this place, when I came back to the States, I finally started to understand many of the pleasures and conveniences that I had around me and where those actually were sourced globally. From that moment onward, it was kind of a rigorous undertaking simply because I was young and dwarfed, but over the course of the last 5 years, I've gotten to a point where I understand that only by appreciating the sources of those materials can we make them replenishable for everyone and obviously other generations.
So you had this experience at 17, but I suspect that the usage of something like the words global citizen didn't come out at that time, or maybe even as early as 5 years ago. I don't know. When it first came, did you think of it as, how did you mean it? Was it a metaphor for you? Was it a description of you? Was it just something that was being used around you in other circles? Just the term global citizen. How did that first happen for you?
Well, I first heard the word when I was in Guatemala as globalization, only as the understanding of first world principles on third world economies, where you have to make a choice. It's a hard choice. The choice is culture versus economy, whether or not you let the culture flourish or apply first world principles and see it kind of fade away. As I got back and started working on some of the things with organizations or with mentors in the States, I started using just the word global, and I would say only in the past year, through a lot of the efforts that are going on now, have I started to use the word global citizen, usually in context of resource-driven work.
So talk a little bit about, if you take the word global out of it, well, what do you think citizenship means? I mean, how does that show up for you? What does it mean to you as far as being a citizen?
Well, there's two main points that I think about when I think about the word citizen. I am an avid fan of language. If you think about citizen in this day and age, you have to also think about the word consumer. you have to understand that oftentimes people don't think of themselves as citizens, they do think of themselves as consumers. You also have to think about the way in which our societies function, and that we often don't realize that we all live on land that is not owned by us, but by the earth itself, and that we put up imaginary borders and then put down laws and or subsidies, deficits, tariffs, etc. to enforce the idea of ownership on this land. Our economies now function mostly on the extraction of resources in other countries, where we as citizens of one country live off the extraction of resources in another country, yet maintain a deep sense of nationality or national pride, take a lot of pride in our citizenship, and yet don't understand that that word is derived and only is a bounty in its convenience and gifts based on a worldwide extraction, whereas we don't realize the importance of thinking as a worldwide or global community. Instead, we only think of ourselves as citizens of a national country.
So when you think of yourself as a citizen, are there other communities? You talk about being a global citizen, but are there other communities or groups that you identify with, groups that you are involved in that to an extent that you would say I'm a citizen, or at least a specifically strong member?
Well, I would say that aside from the organization that I'm starting to forge for myself, which is based on trying to find environmental, moral, or simply common sense-based people that believe in working towards common goals, the organization that I've found and the movement that I've found that really hits the idea of global citizenship home is 350.org, and understanding that, as I mentioned earlier today in class, last year on October 24th, for the first time, we saw the largest group of people in the history of the world gather in protest of industrial effects on climate change, whereas this coming October 10th we'll see it even doubled, where for the first time we're starting to understand what global citizenship is, to transcend barriers of race, economy, nationality, sexual preference, creed, in the understanding that if we don't take care of our surroundings and our environment, we won't be able to have a home in which to claim citizenship in general.
So this question reads, instead of global citizenship, why not use terms such as global awareness or global person or member of the human family? What does global citizenship bring to the table that other terms do not bring, in your opinion?
One of the tricks in language, especially in citizenship, is the same argument that some environmentalists would urge for the privatization of all resources and all land. Now, it sounds like a crazy concept, and I don't necessarily advocate it. However, it is a very interesting concept to think that if every square inch of land, air, and water was owned, so would the interests of it be. Therefore, when you think of a word like citizenship, you have to understand that it implies that same type of ownership. That when you inspire nationality or national pride within someone, you also inspire the welfare of the land and resources of that country. When you think about global citizenship, it implies that you are invested in a life that is based on global awareness. So I think that all of those terms that said after citizenship can be subsumed by the word citizenship and then supplanted and then also reinforced with the identity that responsibility ties into it.
Some people argue that citizenship necessarily must be restrained within state and national borders. How do you respond to that?
That's a tricky question. I would say that our emphasis now on immigration, on migration, and all of these things is based on the same system that has destroyed the resources of the world. It's a profit-based system, which I don't necessarily disagree with profit. I do disagree with profit without responsibility. The idea of a nation, looking at migration from a responsible standpoint instead of a profitable standpoint, would change those things. What we need to do is start to look at the business models and the economic models of the countries in which we live, and to think about a way in which those economies can be rooted in innovation based on responsibility. Only once that happens can the immigration of other peoples be based not on coming to make a buck, but on coming to be part of a larger system. And once we establish that system, only can we look at a bright or even possible future.
Yeah. So do you think people are global citizens from birth? Is everyone a global citizen by default, or is it by virtue of living in an interdependent world? Or do we become that?
Well, I think that it relies on two things. The first, once again, it relies on language. There's a huge difference between saying you're a global citizen and being a global citizen. I use the example over and over and over again about the Vision Quest, or the Native American process and ritual where the youth is thrust out into the wilderness without food or water for multiple days and has to, in essence, find his man or womanhood. I believe very much that we are all global citizens from birth, but it doesn't necessarily mean we are good global citizens from birth. I believe only by using crucible-type understandings and processes can we look at the things that we truly need, strip all of the commodities and the conveniences away to understand the bare essentials, and only once we take those things not for granted can we add things like commodities, but based on responsibility. Therefore, to be a global citizen is one thing. To live as a citizen and to take pride in the way that you are a citizen is another. So it's a multifaceted question.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you want to leave with the people who will view this video that you think is significant about either being a global citizen or the use of the term?
The thing that I reiterate and hit home with over and over again with my students, with my peers and colleagues, is that citizenship is also a commodity. Once again, rooting back to language, the fact that we're able to have this interview, the fact that you're able to write on paper, the fact that you're able to have a class, the fact that I'm able to do any of this work is based on the fact that we borrow this land from the future. And unless we find ways to begin to work together, though violence, strife, and conflict are inherent humanly, there are ways to overcome, there are ways to compromise, there are ways to look at the future with open eyes, and to embrace that word citizen, instead of consumer. And only in thinking in global terms will we be able to fix the real problems that we have. And if we fix 7 out of 8, that last one will still come back and bite us. It is only by working together as an earth that we will be able to overcome these things, and I urge everyone to do so.
Thank you, Dane.
Thank you.